with rotation of the hips, we've got a couple of things that we want to watch out for. So structurally speaking, and I guess in some sense kinetically speaking, our hips are designed to drive motion. Our lower extremities designed to drive motion. Okay, the drive of motion, propulsion, we'll call it, supination versus pronation. There's more room structurally for most people, for the vast majority of people, to externally rotate versus internally rotate. Internal rotation of the hip is a foreign concept for 9 out of 10, 19 out of 20, 99 out of 100, some very high percentage of clients. When you ask them to internally rotate, the number one thing that they're going to do is toe hold themselves, right? You're a black belt, you can't do that. Okay, so no toe holding. We want to watch for movement of the ankle more than anything, okay, versus movement of the hip. Now this is very, very, very subtle. With this little bit, typically speaking, if I was doing some sort of comparative investigation of mobility in a more detailed way, like outside of this context, say it was an MAT session, or just some sort of detailed comparative investigation where I was going to do restorative isometrics of some sort with some muscle testing or some positional testing, I would actually want a bit of foot hanging off the table, particularly if I was looking at the ankles. And when we get to the ankles, you'll actually see some of that. Okay. For the hip, I want quite literally a level playing field. So I'm going to ask David to slide up just a little bit so his feet are fully on the table. Good. And there's no gravitational force driving him into any sort of knee extension, ankle plantar flexion, knee flexion, ankle plantar flexion, none of that stuff. So I'm going to come to his left side, and I'm going to, so ideally, perpendicular to this axis, I'd be looking into the bottom of his foot. The challenge is if I look into the bottom of his foot, I can't see any of the other stuff that I need to see. Okay? So I'm going to choose to look at this from kind of like a bottom, front, slightly lateral view. Okay, so I'm going to stand kind of at the corner of the table. David, keeping your knee and your ankle still, what I want you to do is turn, and the only cueing I want you guys to do is, in certain instances, you can say, I want you to just turn the leg in, right? So you can create the movement. You can create a kind of touch version of this cue. So I'm just going to want you to gently turn this femur in on the hip socket. Yes, sir. And relax. Come on down. Okay, now that was actually pretty good. I noted a little bit of knee flexion, but his ankle stayed pretty relaxed the whole time. Okay, there was no hiking of the hip, which is another thing we see. People will sort of do this to create it kind of, the motion sort of substitutes, like it feels like you're turning the hip in when you do this little hip hike thing, but it also potentially creates some space for the hip to turn in. Or at least there's a perception that it creates some space for the hip to turn in. So what I want to do on the first look is see, A, whether or not he has the same amount of range on side 2, and B, if those little nuances were present the same way, or the lack of little nuances was the same on this side. So standing in the same bottom corner, can you turn the right hip in for me? And right, exactly. So the cool thing was the nuances were, or lack thereof, were pretty similar, but there wasn't nearly as much range of motion. So for this, so A, frankly, seeing that much hip internal rotation on a guy is rare, right? It's like I said, that like what we saw preliminarily on his left side is uncommon for most males. Okay, so I want to make sure that I want to make sure that I saw what I actually saw. So was there any pain associated with that?
On the left side or the right side?
Either side.
On the right side, I have a little bit of stiffness in my lower back, and I have a partial tear on my meniscus.
Awesome, good to know, right? Which would have been present on, which would have presented hopefully on client intake, which we're going to go through later. Okay, Are you okay to do it again, or is it too much
no,
pain?
it's fine.
Okay. Just tap if you. So let's have you turn that left leg in one more time. It's just a huge amount of range. That's awesome. And you can see he's not flaring his ankle. He didn't hike his hip up. There's no knee flex, anything like that. And let's go on the right side now. And relax. Okay, so one cool thing that happens, and this happens a lot, thank you isometrics, it actually was a little less drastic second time around. He actually opened up a little bit on his right side. Okay, I'm gonna call it a 2. Probably went from a 3 to a 2. Because the right side opened up so much. Was it painful on the second one?
No, I think part of it is almost mentally. I'm kind of very careful when I first move that leg.
Okay.
Whereas because it felt pain-free the first time, I was like, let me just see if I can do a bit more. So
got it. Okay. So and there's the subjective element of this whole thing as well. So you in the notes section, and there's also a general notes part. So this to me would be fairly outstanding as a result that the hip internal rotation investigation went from a 3 to a 2 with less pain on the second round of investigation. That's actually pretty cool. We'll have noted in David's health history and in the initial exercise consultation that he has a partially torn meniscus, medial or lateral?
medial.
Awesome. Heel hooks. Awesome. That he has a partially torn medial meniscus on his right side. That's going to have a direct influence over internal rotation of the hip, even though it's a knee tissue. And we'll talk about that. Might actually be a great topic for a study group this Friday.